Balancing inclusion and exclusion in online communities. As online community managers, we are often tasked with enforcing rules in our communities, including excluding members from the entire community altogether. Sometimes we have to suspend people, ban people. We have to make those hard decisions. Behavioral psychology believes punishment doesn't change behavior, though. So what does? How can we promote inclusivity and acceptance without relying on punishments for bad behavior? Cesar Manara is a playwright who has been working in the gaming industry as a community manager and truly believes in a better online and offline world to be built by developing meaningful relationships between people. Besides writing, he enjoys planning, launching, and managing communities across different platforms where people can thrive. We're talking about balancing inclusion and exclusion in online communities. Please give a big CMX welcome to Cesar Manara!
I want to head into it, right into it, with an important topic that is the close relationship and ties that exist between one's personal identity, the communities that person is part of, and the behavior that person has. So what's important here is that our identities cannot fully exist without the others. We can only be recognized and exist as an individual person through the recognition of others. It does not exist in a void where no one recognizes one another. So our identities are some part of something that we project and another person identifies as part of the whole. The projecting can be done in several different ways. It can be a particular t-shirt that says something. It can be dyeing your hair or speaking about something. So, and this is essentially telling other people how we want to be seen, how the message that we put across. And of course, we use signs and symbols that we like because they are part of our identity. But we also consider and want to make sure that we hope the other people will identify those symbols and the signs too as the same thing that we identify as those signs. Which means that our individual identities are closely tied to the communities we are part of, because the communities we are part of actually make, we use different symbols and with different signs and all that. So, for example, this gets a little bit more entangled when you factor communities in it because of that. So, for example, recently, not very recently, but some time ago in Brazil, a gay couple became very famous and news on Facebook because they were both kind of chavs, which means that there are tons of gay couples all over the country, of course, but they became famous on top of all the others because they defied or differentiated themselves from what is the gay group identity, how people were seen. It doesn't mean they were any less gay because of it, but it means that people didn't recognize them as such, and thus it was weird and kind of new for people to identify them as such. Large groups, usually when that happens, one of the two things happen. Either the large group kind of excludes those people because they don't see the aha factor that they see, oh, one of us. So they push those people out. Or the individuals themselves don't follow that group because they don't feel fulfilled by that identity. So besides the personal identities, there's also a group identity. Every community, every group has their own identity that they kind of enforce and like to recognize in other people, see through the eyes of the others. Which means that the communities we are part of heavily influence our behavior. And so by behaving like the others in the group, we strengthen our identities. We become more closely identified with the group identity. And with that in mind, of course, creating inclusive places is a noble and desirable goal because we want people to behave inclusively. And if we can get that as part of a group's identity, they tend to be more inclusive. Here we have, then, a noble paladin wielding her mighty hammer and striking those who do not follow a group's identity. And that is largely how we have gone about enforcing certain behaviors and certain values and all the things that we want our community to have. We punish the people who don't follow them. The thing about punishment is it leads to clashes, to misunderstandings, and then sometimes it can lead to violence. And violence is, of course, awful and undesirable. But it is important to understand that it also comes from an idea of justifiable punishment. There's a documentary called The Interrupters, which one of the characters speaks this. When I was 14 years old, there was this guy who used to beat me down in the streets. My stepfather took his life right in front of me. And I felt really good about it. Well, what's intriguing here is that, despite how awful this is, punishment, despite being perceived as just and warranted in some of these cases, his stepfather, for example, felt like he was warranted and he was justified in taking the life of this other man. But behavioral psychology doesn't believe that punishment alters behavior. Take a look at this picture. Albeit it depicts a very older form of punishment, and punishment nowadays is very different than this, we still do it, hoping that it will change something, hoping it will fix the issue. It won't. We cannot hope that someone will change for the better for going through something like this. The thing is, punishment doesn't generate understanding, and it does not alter morality. And altering the moral codes of people is essential if you want them to change how they behave. So I also want to take a look of where this whole idea of punishment comes from, and there's a great work called What Works? Questions and Answers About Prison Reform that was done by Robert Martinson in 1974, so it's pretty old. But he went all across the United States and he studied rehabilitative efforts in the prison incarceration system in the United States. And the conclusion of his study was that with few and very isolated exceptions, the rehabilitative efforts had no appreciable effect on recidivism of inmates. Interestingly, one of the few and isolated exceptions was community counseling. When the counseling and psychotherapy was done inside and by people inside the offender's community. One of these studies found that therapy did seem to reduce recidivism after 1 year. So if the person had therapy, 1 year after that, they didn't come back to prison. After 2 years, however, this effect disappeared. Another study by a guy called Schwitzgebel in 1964, he achieved improvements in the attitude of his boys, but not in the rates of recidivism. What both these studies, these particular ones, even though they showed promising results, and the rest of the study that didn't show such promising results, tell us is that the attitude of people, the attitude of people changed, but the behavior they had didn't. I'm not a sociologist, and I cannot fully explain why, but I think I have a pretty good clue, which is because their peers, their environments, and thus their moral codes that they had stayed unaltered. We see that for 1 year, the effect lasted, but after that, they went back to their old lives, and their moral codes, their personal beliefs didn't change. For example, let's say you lived in an environment like this, and you committed a crime, you went to jail, you had psychotherapy, you got better, and you got back to this. What are the chances that your moral beliefs and values and your peers and the people who matter to you would have changed enough for you not to fall back. It's pretty low. Robert Madison, he finishes his study in 1974 with the following conclusion. Punishment of offenders is the major means we have for deterring incipient offenders. About that, actually, criminology nowadays believe that punishment is as effective as a deterrent as this cop. Threatening that slug to beat down that slug because it's slugging and wetting over everything. I have been touching on moral codes now because they are significantly important for determining why are people toxic, why are people violent online. Because online toxicity is just another form of violence that we face. And the answer for this question, however weird it seems, is it is because their moral codes demand it. It is because they feel justified, and what they feel they are doing is warranted or right, or even teaching a lesson, or improving the other person through punishment. It is a weird concept to grapple with at first. We think, how can someone be so awful to kill another person and believe that they are doing the right thing? We have several examples. We have, if we go to the Middle East, women are stoned to death because they did something wrong. The community there, the peers, everyone thinks they are doing the right thing. And it may not speak to our values, but closer to home, we have kids being kicked out of their houses because of who they are. This was touched upon today earlier here. And those parents, not because they don't love their children, it's not because they are awful people, it's because they believe they are doing the right thing. If we take a look at our justice system, for example, it is largely built upon the notion that someone was in the right and someone was in the wrong. Or at least someone was less wrong than the other person. And this is what drives people to make decisions of who wins and who loses. But those decisions, they are made based on a society's beliefs, a society's moral codes. It all depends on what your values are. Death penalty is lawful in some states, unlawful in others, unlawful in some countries, valued in the others. And we tend to think as evildoers, as online trolls, as the main source of toxicity. We think like those are the bad guys. They come to the game or they come to our communities and they are new and they don't know what we do here and they ruin everything. Well, about that belief, Riot Games did a big study on toxicity inside League of Legends, which is one of the most popular games in the world. And they found that only 1% of their players were consistently toxic. That 1% of the players generated about 5% of the toxicity in the game. So even if you managed to get rid of all the trolls, if you excluded everyone else from the community, you would still have 95% of the problem to deal with. It's not a very efficient solution. This was published by Brady and Mayer. And the thing is, criminology believes that in brutal crimes and violence in society, it's pretty much about the same thing. This phrase, clearly, psychopaths account for more than their fair share of harm. But that still leaves the majority of the crime unexplained. The majority of people committing crimes are not psychopaths. They're just everyday people. And these people commit these crimes and this toxicity and everything else because they believe they are doing the right thing. It can be about defending a group's identity, even. I can be so strongly believe in my beliefs that I am violent about defending them. And if someone committed a brutal crime, for example, and wanted to avoid jail, the logical thing to do would be to deny it happened or deny it was I who committed the crime. Say, no, I didn't do it. And people do that in court after their lawyers have talked to them. Before that, perpetrators can be found bragging about their deeds to people who share their moral code. Oftentimes, the police can find the perpetrators bragging about what they did on social media to their friends, to their families. And you only brag about something you are proud of. That means that they believe what they did was correct. And the same thing is on the internet. We share images of people trolling games. People share images of them insulting other people online like they did a cool thing. If they're sharing it, if they're saying, I did that, and they're proudly saying that, it means they're proud of what they did. And Louis C.K. is a comedian, a stand-up comedian in the United States. And he had a show in 2013 where he said, if murder was legal, there would be so much murder. Regular people would murder. You wouldn't trust someone who didn't murder. And while that seemed funny, and we seem to go along with that idea and like it, it's because when he says that, he transports you to a place where you believe murder has been legalized because we don't think it's wrong anymore. Because our legal system, our laws, our rules, our guidelines, our codes of conduct, even the summit's own codes of conduct, is largely based about what we believe is correct. And so if we were to legalize something like murder, it would be because we no longer thought it was wrong. But let's say no, we still think it's wrong, society's view on it hasn't changed a bit, but tomorrow it becomes no longer illegal, or just a misdemeanor. I don't think anyone in here would murder, or maybe a few people. Not a lot. It's because it's not the law against murder prohibiting you from murdering, it's your own moral values. It's because you believe it's wrong, so you're not gonna do it. So, in order to do that, to build inclusive places where people are nice to each other and they treat each other nicely, we need to have everyone doing that from the start. It needs to be cultural. It needs to be what you see and what peers do. And we can change communities' ideas. We can change people's moral codes. But to do that, the peers, not the authority figures, the peers need to disapprove of the behavior. They need to make clear that they are disapproving of something. For example, this is much more efficient to sending a message that this community doesn't like war than an army general going on TV and saying war is wrong. Because this is the peers, these are the people these people care about. Yes, sure, the voices and ideas of charismatic leaders and authority figures matter, but they only matter if the community sees them as something the community like and respect. Because if not, the ideas of those they care about and respect matter much more. With all that in mind, and how can we apply all the science and research that has been done on sociology, criminology, et cetera, to our online spaces, to our communities? Well, the first thing to realize is, that exclusion is normal. And sometimes it is warranted. Sometimes we need to remove someone from our communities because they are not behaving nicely and they are not up to changing. But the important thing to see is that your peers agree to the values that you're using to exclude people. Right? So we keep them out of the communities. The question is it worth excluding someone in name of inclusion? Isn't it a paradox? And no, it's not. It's okay. Sometimes you need to. It's like if someone of you may be familiar with the paradox of tolerance, which is a study that says you don't have to tolerate intolerance. But as long as the person is not promoting tolerance, yes, you have to tolerate their ideas even if you don't agree with them. This is the difference of moral values, the realization that what you believe is right may be different for other person. And you have to be careful and be attentive to not let your own moral values and beliefs lead you to be violent about defending them. Because exclusion does not change behavior. Positive reinforcements do. Kind of like this. If by everything right you got one of these, I would be pretty happy. So back to League of Legends, Riot Games found that punishing negative behavior is important, but players also rewarding one another for positive behaviors. So what they did is create basically two systems. The first one of them was called honor system. Every time that you did something nice, another player, one peer of yours recognized you for it, they give you a point. And these points showed on your profile. That's a treat. So people started being proactively nice because they wanted the treat. They wanted the reward. And that's one thing you can do about it. Because peers are telling peers, the community is telling the community what is desirable and what is rewarded. But the message of what is wrong also needs to come from the community, not from the authority figure. So another thing that Riot did is they had something they called the tribunal system, where players judge players, not the company. And one thing they felt very important to add, and it was very successful, were reform cards. Those cards, they showed the punished player chat logs, and all the information that it was used in their tribunal case, including the percentage of people that agreed that they did something wrong. So people were now getting a message saying 95% of your peers, of your players, thought what you did was wrong, and that's why you've been punished. Giving this information to the players seems to have led to a distinct reduction in bad behavior. Another thing they found is that timing matters, because the person needs to remember the moral values that led to the behavior so it can drive the change of those values. If you punish someone a week after what they did, they're not going to remember what made them do that. They must say like, oh, I was just thread off, I was having a bad day, not going to do it again. And then they get in the situation where they feel worked up and they get insulted and they feel like someone has justified them to be violent again. So they automate everything, and the system could provide nearly instantaneous feedback about something right after someone was punished. This helped a lot and reduced. So I believe that moving forward, we, as managers of our communities, really need to recognize and stop thinking that we're doing our part by simply handing out punishments. There's much more to do and much more that needs to be done than just punishing and excluding people from our communities. Remember this. This is not effective. This won't fix the issue. We also need to change the idea that we had in 1974 that punishment is efficient as a deterrent. It's not the laws, it's not your code of conduct, it's not your guidelines. This doesn't stop the slug. Another point is the internet is big, and we're just sending the trolls out to other communities if we simply exclude them. We can't change people because it's a peer thing, it's a peer culture. So that means that everyone you change is a peer to someone else, and they will change someone else in the future. They will spread the message, and that's how cultures change. Because once everyone, everywhere, truly believes that violence is wrong and that toxicity is wrong, it will end. We needed to have it never to be justified anyhow, like this. We do that by spotlighting the positive behavior that our members do, give them treats, imbue it in the community's values, make people care about, believe that, alter their moral codes, their belief systems, and let the behavior, peer respect, and inclusion, the wish to belong, drive inclusion and positiveness. I would like to end with a quote from a movie that deeply marveled me and deeply touched me, which is Cloud Atlas from Wachowski sisters. And it says, "Our lives are not our own. From womb to tomb, we are bound to others, past and present, and by each crime and every kindness, we birth our future." Thank you very much.